After leveling my favorite tank, the Warrior, to level 80 at the start of Final Fantasy XIV's Shadowbringers expansion, I thought it'd be fun to try something different, so I got my Gunbreaker to level 80 and now I'm going to share my impressions with you. Let's get started. The best way to start is to answer the question, did I enjoy my time with the Gunbreaker? And the answer is yes, I had a lot of fun, but it didn't start out that way. I felt a little bit weak to start things off, and that's because the Gunbreaker doesn't fall into the traditional archetypes of tanking that exist in Final Fantasy. We have the Warrior as the aggressive tank. They stay alive by fighting harder and slamming their axe a little bit more on the enemy. Meanwhile, the Paladin is the king of defense. The Gunbreaker falls somewhere in between. It feels like a jack of all trades, so I was constantly yearning for a little bit more defense or a little bit more aggression. But the more I came to terms with the way the Gunbreaker is supposed to play, the more I started to enjoy it, the more I was able to say, okay, I don't have to do things the way I did it with the Warrior or the Paladin. It's okay to be a little bit different. And then I started to excel and really enjoy my time with the class. The flow of combat for the Gunbreaker is pretty standard. You have a 1-2-3 combo that builds a resource called cartridges, and you can spend those cartridges on finisher attacks for single targets or area of effect attacks. What makes the Gunbreaker stand out a little bit is a special attack called Gnashing Fang. This is another cartridge spender, but it unlocks a whole new combo that deals more damage than your normal 1-2-3 combo. There's another ability that you unlock at level 70 called Continuation that allows you to weave attacks in between your cartridge combo for even more damage and a million style points. It looks amazing. Every time you do a Gnashing Fang Continuation combo, whoa, it makes me very excited. Okay, but seriously, the Continuation and Gnashing Fang aspect of the Gunbreaker has been my favorite part of the class, and for that reason I do enjoy single target fights quite a bit more, because I'm always staring at the cooldown like, okay, it's time for me to start the Gnashing Fang. Meanwhile, in area group fights, big dungeon pulls, I'm just doing a standard 1-2-3 combo to melt down the enemies. The 1-2 builds up a cartridge, and the third hit is spending the cartridge on a stronger area attack. It doesn't hold a candle to the Warrior, right? When you pull 10 enemies at the same time, you activate Inner Release and you start spamming your beast gauge attacks, doing direct critical hits, massive damage, big numbers appearing on screen. The Gunbreaker cannot compete with that sensation of melting down a group of enemies, putting them in the meat grinder the way Warrior does. But on the flip side, against a single target, the Warrior does feel a bit slow. I wouldn't call it boring, but it's significantly slower feeling than the Gunbreaker because they do not have as many off-global cooldown abilities to weave in and out of their combos. One last thing I'll say about the cartridge system is it does feel a little bit boring. It's more or less the same as the beast gauge system. You build up the resource and you spend it for offensive maneuvers, but the Gunbreaker feels like it deserves more than just an offensive usage of their resource. I don't want to say that the cartridge gauge feels tacked on, but it doesn't feel as if it's been pushed as far as it can go. It's not as dynamic as I think it could be. It would be nice if there was a way to spend cartridges on some kind of a barrier, some way to enhance the Brutal Shell ability that is part of your 1-2-3 combo. I don't know, there's a lot that could be done with it, but as of right now, it does feel a little bit flat, but overall that doesn't detract from the enjoyment that I've had with the class by much at all. Next, we're going to talk about damage mitigation and support abilities. Once again, the Gunbreaker feels like it's a jack of all trades. It's trying to dance in between being a warrior and a paladin. So we've got a powerful ability called Heart of Stone. You unlock this at level 68. It's got a 25-second cooldown, and it reduces damage taken by self or a party member by 15% for 7 seconds. The additional effect, when targeting a party member while under the effect of Brutal Shell, the effect is also granted to the target. So if you're in an 8-man raid and you're the off tank, you can give the main tank a small shield and some extra damage reduction to help them survive a tank buster. If you're main tanking, you have a nice bit of mitigation whenever a tank buster is coming towards you. Now for a comparison, we'll look at the Warrior's Raw Intuition and Nascent Flash. Raw Intuition gives 20% damage reduction for 5 seconds, so you get more damage reduction for yourself, but you get less damage reduction for your teammates. Nascent Flash reduces the target's damage taken by 10% instead of 15%, which is what we had on Heart of Stone. Nascent Flash also has the additional effect of granting some HP restoration to your teammate based on the amount of damage you deal while the buff is active, but the HP restoration is pretty negligible. If I was going to choose an off tank, I would want to choose the Gunbreaker over the Warrior, but switching the roles around isn't necessarily a bad thing. The Gunbreaker also has nice ways to deal with fluff damage. The ability Aurora puts a heal over time on you for 18 seconds with a cure potency of 200. The total potency of Aurora winds up being the same as Clemency from the Paladin and Equilibrium from the Warrior. It just gets spread out over time, so it's not used in the same way. For the Warrior, when I use Equilibrium, it's because I'm in a panic. I need a quick burst of healing to make sure that I don't die. Clemency is the same thing. I need a quick burst of healing. Aurora, it's not going to save you from instant death, but it can help smooth out a fight, make things feel a little bit more even, and potentially ensure that you don't get into that danger zone. The ability Camouflage is also another nice cooldown to deal with fluff damage. It increases parry rate by 50% and reduces damage taken by 10% with a 20-second duration. It has a 90-second cooldown, which feels a little bit too long. I wish it was 60, but overall I'm not mad about the cooldown. There's one more cooldown that is worth noting. Heart of Light grants all party members and yourself 10% reduction in magic damage taken for 15 seconds. So this is a bit more of a situational ability because magic damage is not always being dealt, but when magic damage is a factor, you can help to mitigate that a little bit. So for me, the hardest adjustment for playing the Gunbreaker is feeling as if I'm not totally in control of my own fate, especially in 4-man dungeons. I can't bring myself back from the brink of death the way I can with the Warrior or the Paladin. If we look at the Warrior as an example, like I mentioned before, we have Equilibrium, 1200 cure potency on a 60-second cooldown. We've also got Thrill of Battle, increases maximum HP by 20% and restores the amount increased, and you increase HP recovered via healing actions on yourself by 20% for 10 seconds on a 90-second cooldown. If you activate both of those at the same time, you get a huge chunk of health. It winds up being about 50% of your total HP, which is madness. And for the Paladin, if things are getting completely out of control and you think you're gonna die, you can spam Clemency multiple times to just keep healing yourself until your group's healer can stabilize the fight, then you can get back to doing damage. Then we turn to the Gunbreaker. All you can do is try and keep things as smooth as possible to ensure that you never get to that dangerous place where you need to press all these emergency buttons. So that's something that I don't so much enjoy about the Gunbreaker, but it's okay. I try my best to rotate cooldowns so that things never get to that place where I'm like, oh my god, I need to be saved. To wrap things up, I think the Gunbreaker has a nice place in between the Warrior and the Paladin. It's taken playstyle elements of the both of them and combined them together into a nice gumbo or a nice stew, where I don't feel hyper aggressive like the Warrior, but I'm faster. I feel more agile, especially against a single target, and I don't have the ultimate defense of the Paladin, but make no mistake, the Gunbreaker can hold its own in a fight. You're not going to crumble under the pressure, and I like that about it. So yeah, I would definitely recommend playing the Gunbreaker if you've been someone that's mained the Warrior or the Paladin for a long time. If you've played the Dark Knight, you're probably still going to keep maining that because you're an edgy boy for life, but that's fine. The Gunbreaker is still there waiting for you if you want to try something different. So with all of that said, we're going to wrap things up here, but don't worry, there is more Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers coming soon. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel more than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. The name of the game is Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. The name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.